In the beginning of the crisis, of the corona crisis, so back in February 2020, from the first week on of the crisis, I wrote an opinion paper trying to bring some of the mistakes to people's attention. But I noticed immediately that people just didn't want to know. It was as if they didn't see even the most blatant mistakes at the level of the statistics that we used, that people just were not capable to see it. And one way or another, I decided quite early, in an early stage, that I should focus on the psychological mechanisms that were at play in society. And as I lectured since 5 or 6 years about mass formation and the specific effects of mass formation, which is actually a specific kind of group formation, I noticed quite, I think from May 2020 onwards, I got the impression that what we were dealing with in society was a large-scale process of mass formation, indeed. So I tried to describe that process of mass formation in such a way that many people could understand it. And well, this process of mass formation, indeed, like the most salient characteristics of it, or for instance, that it makes people radically blind for everything that goes against the narrative they believe in. So mass formation is like a kind of group dynamic that emerges in society under very specific conditions. And it has very strong effects at the psychological level. And one of the most crucial is that it makes people completely blind for everything. It makes people incapable of taking a critical distance from what they believe in. And then also, another very specific characteristic is that this process of mass formation makes people willing to radically sacrifice everything that is important to them, even their health, their wealth, the health of their children, the future of their children. When someone is in the grip of a process of mass formation, he becomes radically willing to sacrifice all his individual interests, for instance. And then a third characteristic, to name only a few, is that once people are in the grip of a process of mass formation, they typically show the tendency to commit cruelties towards the people that do not buy into the narrative or that do not go along with the narrative. And they typically do so as if it is an ethical duty. And they in the end, they are typically inclined first to stigmatize and then to eliminate, to destroy the people who do not go along with the masses. And that's why it is so extremely important to understand the psychological mechanisms at work. Because if you understand the mechanisms at work, you can avoid the mass formation to become so deep that people reach this critical point in which they really are convinced, fanatically convinced, that they should destroy everyone that does not go along with them. So it's extremely important to understand the mechanism. If you understand it, you can make sure that the masses will first, the mass will first destroy itself or will exhaust itself before it starts to destroy the people that do not go along with the mass. So it's of crucial importance. And that's actually what my book describes. It describes how a mass or a crowd emerges in a society, under which conditions it emerges in a society, what the mechanisms of the process of mass formation are, and what you can do about it. You can never, that's extremely important, I will mention this from the beginning, usually it is impossible to wake up the masses. Once a process of mass formation emerges in a society, it's usually extremely difficult to wake the masses up. But that's important. You can avoid that the masses and their leaders become so fanatically convinced of their narrative that they start to destroy the people who do not go along with them. So that's crucial, I think. And it all depends. And in order to really understand what we can do, You have to understand the psychological mechanism as well as possible. And then you will see that actually mass formation, as you mentioned already, is identical to hypnosis. It's not similar, it's identical. Mass formation is a kind of hypnosis. And in the full technical psychological sense of the word, it's hypnosis. And a kind of hypnosis which emerges under very specific conditions. And that's exactly what happened, for instance, in the Soviet Union, in Nazi Germany, which were examples of totalitarianism from the early 20th century. Totalitarianism, which a totalitarian state is something radically different from a classical dictatorship, for instance. And the main difference is situated at the psychological level. A classical dictatorship at the psychological level is very primitive. It's just society that is scared of a small group dictatorial regime because of its aggressive potential. But a totalitarian state, which was radically new in the 20th century, it didn't exist. Totalitarian states didn't exist before the 20th century. A totalitarian state is based on a completely different psychological mechanism. It's based on mass formation, which is a hypnosis which emerges under very specific conditions, which were met just before the emergence of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and which were met again, even more, just before the Corona crisis. So that's so typical. It's a different kind of totalitarianism now. It's not the same. It's a technocratic totalitarianism. But the basic psychological dynamic and mechanism is the same.